The Road to Autonomy is presented by the Road to Autonomy Index. The Road to Autonomy Index is a rules-based equity benchmark index that measures the performance of a basket of global companies that are involved in the development and commercialization of autonomy. Institutional investors and fund managers are watching megatrends that are shaping investment opportunities today. These megatrends are creating thematic investment ideas and opportunities for forward-thinking investors. We believe that one of the biggest megatrends today is autonomy. That's why we created the Road to Autonomy Index, the world's first and only pure-play index to track the thematic investment opportunity in autonomy. Follow the Road to Autonomy Index on your favorite finance app by simply typing in the ticker Autonomy. To learn more about the Road to Autonomy Index, visit roadtoautonomy.com/index.
Stephen, how is Magna approaching safety systems?
So Magna is one of the only real few suppliers that has the entire set of enablers to make it happen and do a complete system. So we're thinking about the whole system as a package rather than individual pieces of that package. And that allows us to develop these market-leading products that deliver the enhanced safety and convenience for the driver. So our portfolio is kind of intended to be scalable and allow the integration into other solutions and allow us to work closely with the customers. And we want to make sure that gets out to as many people as possible. I mean, that's really the end goal for us, is to get it as many people as possible.
Why take the complete system approach and not pieces of the system?
I mean, when I say the complete system, I don't necessarily mean we have to supply every piece of it, that we want to deliver it as a system. And the reason for that is that so many of the OEMs and other tier ones, when it's been a fail, has been because they haven't really been able to manage a complete system. So definitely don't expect that every tier one or every OEM will manufacture everything by themselves. That would be illogical and also very expensive. So we're not trying to do that, but we're trying to make sure we can give something that adds value to the end user.
Value is what's going to drive your share price. Value is what's going to drive repeat customers. What role do sensors play in the suite that you're developing and then commercializing?
Sensors are, of course, an important piece of the puzzle here. They help us to see outside of the vehicle, and you can see a sensor as a piece of hardware, but also it could be something else. It can be a kind of a pseudo sensor, like high definition maps or very accurate positioning systems or fusion as well. But of course, that's how we interpret information from the vehicle and around the vehicle, so we can actually do things with that information. And we start to notice that as this becomes more and more software heavy, you can do more interesting things with the software that you don't necessarily need to know when you specify the hardware in the first place.
How important is it to gather data around the vehicle? Perhaps if you're taking a right-hand turn and there's a curb, or you're pulling in and you're backing in and there's a curb, how important is it to get data from around the vehicle's environment?
It becomes more and more important as you move up the chain of autonomy and you start to get into more and more scenarios. You're actually inherently needing to have more data about what's around you, and that can come from sensors, as I said, with curbs and so on that you see, and it can also come from information you cannot see from high definition maps and so on. So knowing what's happening around you is, of course, a good way to make sure you have a comfortable ride and you don't make mistakes that end up causing an issue.
Is that a camera radar approach for knowing your surroundings, or is there another piece of technology that fits into that?
I would try not to get stuck into one or another type of technology, because they all have inherent strengths and weaknesses. And if you know the strengths and weaknesses, you know when the use case comes out, what you're trying to achieve, you can actually use those advantages and play away the weaknesses with something else. So if you think about a camera sensor, for example, they were quite expensive not that long ago, but changes in technology have driven down the price. The same with radars, changes in technology have driven down the price. So you can potentially use a combination to get a good overlap, and you can use more software-defined technology to use that to your advantage with range, and both long range and close range with switching modalities and so on, to give you something that helps you in your surroundings, let's say.
Does the software-defined vehicle become the next large game changer for OEMs, being able to update over the air?
I would hope so. I mean, that's what we're thinking about in our own internal discussions and the way we're setting out a strategy as well, that the software-defined vehicle really helps you to maximize the vehicle fleet. So you think about an individual vehicle, but you also think as a fleet of vehicles and a generation of vehicles as well. And as long as we move away from having hardware that only fulfills the scenario you deliver at the time of SOP, you have the ability to continually update and improve the system, which is, I think, of course, good for the customer experience to spend a lot of money on a vehicle as they're getting more expensive, bigger, heavier every generation. And also from a perspective of using the resources that we're putting into those vehicles as well. So it's a win-win scenario if we can make that work. And that also helps in, as I said, you can squeeze out much more from sensors when you're using more software in them as well.
Can the software eventually be upgraded for autonomous driving as you sell a package to your OEM customer? Can you push out a software update to upgrade it to autonomy?
I think I would answer the question yes, that's the simple answer. But of course, it depends on the package that you included in the vehicle at the time of production. So the answer is yes, to a limit. You will always be able to squeeze out more. I've been in a few generations of our old hardware where we've actually done a lot more than we expect to be able to do with hardware over a 5-year period. Where we basically redefined and redeployed a new neural network on that hardware for vision technology. And I would say none of us could really have seen how much you could squeeze out from it, the first release of it. But by the second release, we've done a lot more. And I think that's going to keep happening.
What are your thoughts about the neural network approach that some companies are taking, where they can do it all with a neural net end to end?
It's really advantageous for certain types of scenarios. So it allows you to basically train with a lot of data and get something out which you don't have to manually hard code. So it's a very strong way to get a lot done with quite low resources in a CPU. As long as you have an AI accelerator, you can do quite a lot with it. And it also allows you to continually update and improve because you can train it for the scenarios you want it to work with as well. Generally, neural networks have been used in sensors on their own. So they've been used in a lot of vision systems and systems that are really taking information from the surroundings and trying to determine what type of object it is, whether it comes from a point cloud or from an image. But I actually start to see that with the amount of AI processing available to us, you can start to do also a lot more interesting things with navigation or planning or other things in the vehicle, maybe interaction with the human and making sure that you can learn the behaviors and so on as well, that really start to help in other areas as well.
Is there a difference from a traditional system versus a neural network-based system in terms of compute in the vehicle? Does one need more or less compute in the vehicle?
It's different, I would say. Maybe you, of course, need a different type of processing power in the vehicle to do neural networks compared to traditional image processing or algorithm processing. But I would say that it's not necessarily more in proportion to the kind of chips that you can get for the price that you can get them as well. So I would say that you can't really, it's the same thing as with PCs. The iterations of chips you can get for a PC, they continually improve. Something goes to a limit, you start to see that, for example, clock frequencies and so on, they reach the limits of what you can do with silicon, but you still can optimize and optimize and optimize and get a lot more out of them anyway. So I would say that that's more important than necessarily saying it's more processing power required or less. It's what you can do with that processing.
Is optimization one of the keys as these vehicles become electrified, where you're operating the ADAS system, eventually the autonomous driving system, and you have an electric battery where you have to really optimize for range because that's what consumers want, while also optimizing for performance?
Yeah, and of course, that's an interesting dilemma because, as maybe we just touched on here, so you will increase the performance of a CPU for every generation that comes out. You also generally, at the moment, increase the power consumption required for that generation of CPU and the hardware that's supporting that CPU as well. You have more memory, you have more hardware around it, and you have a lot more processing availability to you in the whole vehicle. Where you have to start to trade that off then is, okay, do you need everything in all scenarios? Can you, on a certain scenario, turn things off, turn blocks off, or so on and so forth? And I think other areas of other industries have figured that out by only really having on what you need to have on for the scenario you're sitting in and then turning everything else into a low power state. And that's something you have to build into the whole setup. So you have to have that included in your software and your hardware and so on. But if you do, it means you can start to really tweak it for the actual scenario you're in at the time.
How do you do that with balancing safety without compromising safety?
It's a difficult one to prove when you start to do the validation of such a system, but it's quite logical. If you're in a city and you have a lot of traffic around you and you have a lot of pedestrians around you and you have certain requirements of you can't see around corners because of big buildings or skyscrapers and so on as well, you need to have maybe every sensor available to you and you need to know that you're not going to hit the curb and so on around you on the side. But if you're on a remote highway and you're driving at 65, 70 miles an hour and you don't have any pedestrians, you can still keep the safety level because you'll see those things further ahead of you, but you maybe don't necessarily need to have the low speed sensors active, for example, and the low speed software active.
And that's all just controlled through software. So let's say you're in a level 2 system with highway driving. the driver's not going to say, okay, what button do I hit? Oh no, I don't want to hit the wrong button. That all goes away. I'm assuming it's all software driven, all done automatically in that level 2 system for the driver.
It has to be in the scenario of the level 2 system or level 2 plus plus or level 3, whatever level we would like to call it, which I think, we should be a bit careful about defining in this call, but it's dependent on the scenario. And of course, the scenario should be intelligent because you know where you are. And if you have high definition maps and you have your speed and you have all the data you have access to, you actually have very good knowledge of what you're supposed to be looking for and not. So
when is the right time to introduce driver monitoring? The systems, we can agree, let's remove levels from the equation. They're getting more advanced. Individuals do, I'll use the word silly things with certain levels of systems, which really opens this driver monitoring debate to ensure safety and to ensure that the driver is using the system properly and, I'll use the term, not misbehaving. So when is the time to introduce driver monitoring, in your opinion?
I think we're there already now. There's so many functions in the vehicle that already can be used or misused in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense, but also there's an advantage for the driver themselves as well. I mean, you can actually use that information for more than just monitoring. You can use that information for supporting the driver as well. An example is that if you know that the driver has been looking at a specific object, you maybe don't have to warn for it as early as you would if you didn't see that driver saw the object out in the real space. So we've done some research projects looking at that, and we can see that you get a very good correlation to a 3D space, and you can say, okay, I won't warn for that car in front because we assume the driver's, we know the driver has seen it, we assume the driver will make correction for it, and it's a comfort thing. Generally, these braking systems don't interact until very late because you can brake much harder than you think as a driver.
I'll give you a scenario. I was on the highway last week, and this individual decided to be crazy, to go 100 miles an hour, zigzagging all around. So my eyes are watching this car as they go left, all the way right. And you're watching this trying to determine, am I going to get cut off? Am I going to have to cut back? The system, can I detect that if I'm following this car in front of me to know, okay, he's doing the right thing, the safe thing. He's not misbehaving or distracted. He's trying to watch out what this reckless driver is doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, obviously that driver is not the safe one. You're the safe one, having reflected on what's going on in front of you. And what you can do then, as I said, so you can have, and this is very OEM specific, you can have different levels of interaction. So what you can do is you can, first of all, if you see something that's coming into your field and you could have an impact on it, it doesn't matter if it's far away or if it's close. You can, of course, tune that to the individual driver or to the OEM. You can start with an audible warning, right? But if you've seen it and you're watching it, you're tracking it, then you wouldn't have to have that audible warning because you can see that driver is paying attention. And if not, you could maybe give an audible warning and they would look to the area where it would be needed. And then you get a bit closer and maybe, the car will just brake slightly to let you know, or start to slow down to let you know something's going on. Again, if you're looking at the car and you see what's going on, there's a potential for it to not do that interaction until you're actually in a situation it needs to. So that's kind of way you can use it to your advantage.
The driver monitoring rules are then set by the OEM. So let's say we have OEM A, OEM B, OEM C. They set the different rules for how the driver monitoring system will work.
This is more of a drive policy type of function or a safety type of function I'm describing here. So, of course, there's an interaction between those systems. The driver monitoring, as I said, it's just a camera. It doesn't really know what it needs to do more than it follows your eyes. It follows your head pose. We use it also for the breath detection or the impaired driver detection as well. So we can see if your eyes are behaving in an abnormal way, if you're impaired and so on. But then that information has to be interpreted in a different way. So first of all, how the driver is behaving, looking, if they're paying attention or not. Then it's up to the drive policy in the vehicle to say, should I do something with that information? And different OEMs will treat that in different ways. Some will let you drive more aggressively and some will let you get closer and some will keep you further away. And there's no right or wrong in this question. It's just depending on the type of vehicle you're driving. It's the same as if you drive a very high-end vehicle with air suspension or a vehicle with very hard suspension because you have the driver feel. There's a difference in your driving behavior, and that can be reflected also in the drive policy.
Where is the most ideal place to put driver monitoring inside a passenger vehicle?
We have our clear view with the rear view mirror, and that's a very optimal place because you get quite good view over the whole vehicle itself. And with the performance of the sensors we have today, you can see a large portion of the vehicle and the rear seats as well, which is very good. You can't see everything, but you can see a large portion of it as well. But it depends, of course, on what you're trying to achieve. As you start to go through this having these monitoring systems, which, I mean, they're not just monitoring. Monitoring for me is a negative term, but they're actually supporting the driver, right? So they're helping you to make decisions or do things. You can use them for different things as well. You can use them for gesturing or something else. There's no stopping the reasoning to use that. It doesn't necessarily have to be eye tracking. Then maybe you want to have them in different placements in the vehicle and maybe have multiple of them as well. We've seen a couple of scenarios where customers have wanted to have that. They've wanted to have them placed in multiple places in the vehicle. For a safety perspective, it makes sense to have it on the driver and the passenger, but you also maybe want some other functionality for the rear seats. We also combine that in our product portfolio with interior cabin sensing with radars, for example, that can actually detect the breathing of passengers and occupants in the car. And that allows you to see, for example, if you've left a child behind in the vehicle after you've left the vehicle and so on, because they can really, with a very small amount of breathing, understand if that person is still there.
Do we get to the point where this is probably an OEM, but if this is your technology, I'd love to know, where, God forbid, a child's left in the car vehicle in the summer. NHTSA publishes scary data here in the United States every year around that. Could it turn the air conditioning on and then notify a first responder that there's an endangered child there to potentially save that child's life? Is there ability to do that?
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. So you can, of course, the same thing as we discussed before. It's up to a preference of the OEM, what they would like to use that information for. We can let the system inside the vehicle know what's going on. And then there's, of course, you could wind down all the windows. You could sound the horn. You could flash the lights. You could send an SMS to the driver and warn emergency services. There's plenty of things you can do with that. There's nothing stopping. When you have a connected vehicle like we do in most cases in these scenarios, you can do a lot of things with that information.
What you're describing throughout this whole conversation are the building blocks for autonomy. Overall, how is Magna approaching autonomous driving?
We're seeing it's a stepwise approach. So we look at the system as a whole, and a lot of things are reusable. So, it's the same as whatever you're doing in life. Your experience is generally quite reusable for the next step you're trying to take. So in a kind of autonomous scenario, you're really taking a huge leap in terms of what you can do with a vehicle, but you're not taking it as big of a leap when you come to technology. A lot of things are still pretty similar. It's more about proof and data and training for the systems and so on that's different, and maybe number of sensors are different, but the individual sensors are generally quite similar in a lot of cases. The kind of competence you need to make that happen. So we're taking the approach that we're looking for the best bang for the buck by investing in the areas we believe are getting out to the most drivers as possible in the near term. And then we're using that to leverage our long-term strategy. Of course, like everyone, I would be very happy to see full autonomy coming out, but I'm not sure it's going to be next year. I think this is a long way away. So
it's a long way away, and thank you for not giving a timeline. We've all seen what happens when timelines are put out. A lot of them are never met. We both agree that at some point, no timeline here, no date, that full autonomy will be achieved and will be unlocked. Do you view, for Magna, autonomy a long-term growth market for the company?
It depends a lot on the ownership perspective of that. If you see, and again, sometimes we have to dig into our own personal feelings. Like I, as a person, would like to own my vehicle, and that's for some reason part of me. And it could be illogical in some cases, and there are lots of people that want to own their vehicles. But at the end of the day, by the time this comes, maybe it's not me that is the market, it's my children, and my children not necessarily need to own a vehicle. They would prefer to have services. So I think where you start to go into, if you think about the generation we're in right now, and you think about how much has changed since the time of getting the first Nintendo to where we are today, for example, and then you think about our kids that are growing up in a completely new domain with AI and lots of other things that we did not have, like VR and so on as well. It's very difficult to know exactly how they want to purchase a vehicle. Of course, for Magna, we will follow and lead where we can the kind of the sensors, the systems, the way of thinking, the software, and so on, and take steps in the right direction. But it's not for sure that it's going to be as we expect it to be today.
It's not going to be expected. There's a lot of undecision in the market. For a long time, it was robotaxi or bust on the passenger vehicle side. Now we're seeing comments from Mary Barra, Chair and CEO at GM, around personally autonomous vehicles. Mr. Paul Jacobson, CFO at GM, around personally owned autonomous vehicles. Some of the luxury manufacturers are starting to look like into that market as well. Do we get to a hybrid market at some point where if you want to subscribe to an autonomous vehicle, use it as an Uber-like service, you have that option, where if you want to buy it because you've got all the stuff in your car, you got the lacrosse sticks, the baseball, the swimming, all the stuff that you need for the children, and as you play dad taxi to take them around, you have that option as well. Do we have a hybrid market where there's multiple options available?
I don't see why not. I think that fully autonomous vehicles will come when the price point and the business case and use case makes sense, right? So if you have a $500,000 vehicle is the lowest starting point in today's money, of course, that will limit the number of customers you can get. If by the time that comes out, you can actually have a reasonably priced vehicle that is achievable for most people, and they want to have everything like that, as you said, you have a personal ownership feeling as well, having your own things in the car and being able to get in whenever you need to, and so on and so forth. I think that it will, of course, definitely be a use case where people would want to still buy their vehicles. There's still some hybrids of that. A lot of people lease, so it could be also a leasing vehicle model where you feel you own it, but you personally keep it at home. But it's a different type of model. But especially when you start to consider if you want to continue upgrading these vehicles as well, like if you imagine in the future you can kind of take out sensors or put in sensors or upgrade the ADAS ECU and so on, maybe that also makes sense to have some more kind of leasing model. But we look at right now, it's a long way away. We look right now that in 2030 it's probably going to be less than 1% or around 1% of vehicles that are produced with a level 4, level 5 system, and I mean that's a date. But it's not fixed, I would say. It still depends a lot on how the OEMs play. And so we don't know exactly how that will play out. And if it doesn't play out, then of course we push that further away from us. And that means that something else can change, pricing or technology or something we did not expect to change. So
Magna's in a great spot. You have access to a lot of data. You service a lot of OEMs and you have access to a lot of data. We've seen subscription services. Porsche tried it. GM tried it with Cadillac subscription service. I do feel at some point there will be some sort of subscription service, but I think in order to really enhance it and scale it, there has to be some sort of loyalty program very similar to what Marriott has with Bonvoy, what United and Delta have with the airlines. There has to be something there to build that loyalty, because a consumer, in my opinion, is not going to want to spend $500,000 to buy a vehicle that also has to be upgradable. I believe that we're going to have to get to the sub $30,000 investment, and then perhaps there's a monthly fee on that. Because unfortunately in society, everything is going as a subscription. Do you feel that consumers would be comfortable buying something, let's say a vehicle for $30,000, than having to pay a monthly subscription? Or is everything going to have to get bundled into one monthly subscription? I ask that when you're seeing a lot of data here in the United States from the Federal Reserve around auto delinquencies, and the number one complaint from consumers is the down payment. They don't want to put $5,000 US down, $10,000 US down. Do we just get to a point where an OEM says, okay, for X amount of dollars a month, you can have all those features without a down payment?
Again, I think it depends on the business case for the company who's taking that risk, right? So I think it's all about risk. Somebody has to take a risk to decide to invest in a vehicle fleet and make it available to a set of customers. And of course, if we can, by that point in time, make it upgradable, you kind of extend the lifetime of that vehicle. You can also minimize the risk that it becomes obsolete in a generation or a few years. So that's, I would say, depending on kind of the one who's taking the risk and the consumers. But the consumers, again, if I ask my children, which I do sometimes, because I want to hear what they're thinking about things, they don't really care about owning a car too much. I don't think they would mind having a subscription. They might want to have a down payment, might not. But if you look at the way they work, they're used to microtransactions. They're used to having money and using it in different ways than I was when I was growing up. And I think that will be something that sticks, and probably the next generation will be even more different as well. I think some OEMs have tried that kind of like hybrid version of you buy the car but not the batteries, and that's been a bit painful in some cases. While you lease the batteries, you buy the car, for example. I think that was something that was popular some years ago. Didn't turn out great. So I think it depends on who really is taking the risk and what they're prepared to go for. But again, if you ask my children, and they're not representative of everyone's children, but I think that I am less a friend of paying for things over time than buying it. And they are more prepared to buy something over time with a fee and get access to it straight away. So
kids are interesting. You learn a lot from talking to kids. We watched Ready Player One last week, and the amount of questions I got about the metaverse, and it was really, really interesting what you can learn from kids. And you're right, they do have different spending approaches. We see it in the credit card data. We see it in the way that they conduct their lives. They like having access to something, not necessarily owning the asset, where an older generation would prefer to own the asset, not just have access to it. That's a risk, perhaps, but I'm not going to judge it's a risk, or perhaps it's a benefit. Don't know. When you look at developing autonomous driving stacks, it is a multi-billion-dollar investment. Some of the world's smartest, most talented engineers, which there's a shortage of, we need to develop this technology. Do we get to a point where the developments rapidly accelerates, the talent shrinks, where OEMs go to a Magna and just license your autonomous driving stack so they don't have to take on all those internal development costs?
So I think here's where you get into a very interesting conversation, because at the moment, I think the tendency around the autonomy as a whole, but also the way that automotive has been changing, and it's quite a painful change the last 10 years, because you're introducing more software, more sensors, more autonomy. Whether you call it level 1 or level 5, it doesn't matter. You're getting more and more of information usage in the vehicles, and you're using more of what you can see around you to make intelligent decisions and so on as well. And the trend right now is to be in control of everything. So every tier 1, every tier 2, every OEM generally would like to be involved in the creation of a product, right? Which makes sense. Of course, everyone has to find their niche in this change, but it doesn't necessarily mean everyone should do all pieces. And I think from my very strong perspective and from Magna's perspective, of course, we want to be a partner to our customers, which means that wherever they feel that they need support from us, they can get support from us. If they are very strong and they have very strong teams of developers working on their branding, whether that be how the vehicle looks or how it behaves in traffic, we can support them with sensors and middleware and other pieces around that. We can provide services and we can provide hardware and software for them. And then there will be places where OEMs don't have the ability to invest those billions of dollars, and there that makes sense that we could supply it. So I think it's going to land in a few years' time. It's not going to be solved today or tomorrow. It's a few years away. I'm not sure if that's 3 or 7 or 10 years, but at the end, I think there will be some players that will be doing everything themselves and some players that will be supported by a company like Magna. And you can see that with the fact that we do a lot of contract manufacturing as well, is that some like to do the investments up front and do everything themselves. And some say, hey, our strength is our design and our profile and our business and our brand awareness, and we'd prefer someone else to do the rest for us. And that's what will happen with software.
Today, can Magna, obviously you can develop a level 2 semi-autonomous system and you're working on a fully autonomous, to the point in the future where an OEM can come to you and say, okay, this vehicle line, we'd like to put a semi-autonomous system in. This vehicle line, we'd like to put an L4 system in that. Do we get to that point where you're serving your needs by partnering with your customers?
Yeah, I think we're definitely getting to that point. And that's not as far as away, especially with the level 2 plus systems, as you may think. We're already there, quite close to that now. So basically, we would provide software, hardware, and a complete setup, and say, okay, let's make it work with your vehicle. And then basically, you have something that you don't have to build from ground up. So, and that makes a lot of sense as well. You get the advantages of the scale if you do it that way as well.
Then the costs go down.
The costs go down for everybody, yeah.
It's a win because some OEMs that are trying to develop this all in-house, we've seen there's all public filings, the billions of dollars that they've spent with no return, and you're seeing pressure from Wall Street to do those returns. They can easily come to you and say, okay, we spent $8 billion on this program. I'm sure you can cut a deal for $4 billion. And they're 50% $4 billion ahead. Where does Magna's collective perception system come into play?
So that's a really interesting proposition for us, because we've been researching quite a few different sensors over the years, but the collective perception concept has been something that really could make a difference to a lot of future of how we look into how vehicles are managed and driven, and especially autonomous functions as well. And that is using infrastructure that already exists. It's enabled by high-speed connectivity, of course, which is more and more available and is available in more and more vehicles as well, to be able to see things that the car can't. And I mean, in the first step, what you can envisage, of course, is you use infrastructure cameras, you use other vehicle information, you use digital twins and so on and so forth to see around corners, to make sure that you have safety in scenarios where you could not see or could not do something before. And that's something that I think is very strong and very powerful. In the secondary step, it also allows you to reduce the number of sensors in a car, because you have if you look at the higher levels of autonomy, you start to have a lot of belt and braces. You have many sensors that maybe overlap each other a lot, because you don't want to make a mistake. You cannot make a mistake in a level 3 plus or a level 3 or level 4 system. Whereas if you have collective perception and you really make it work properly, you could actually, in theory, start to reduce the processing power required in the vehicle and start to do things outside the vehicle as well. I mean, some scenarios you can then, where you don't have milliseconds to solve it, you could actually put that and offload it outside the vehicle, which would enable you to reduce the requirements inside the vehicle. I think we're a fair way away from that. But again, in the first case, where you start to use this to really see things you cannot see otherwise, is really powerful. And trends as well. I mean, we've looked at it with trends. Like you could see, for example, from infrastructure cameras, how people consistently walk across a piece of grass and cross the road where there's no walkway. And you could then put that into a map which says to you, hey, your car needs to slow down a little bit before getting to that point, because people generally stand behind trees and walk out into the road at this point, for example. Or you can be ready for that just in case without having to necessarily do anything about it. You could be ready that that could happen, for example. You can't do that in any other way with a vehicle. You can only see what you can see. So
is that pre-mapped? Is that updating in real time? How do you see that? Because that's really interesting. If somebody historically, you're right, they walk on the grass behind a tree, you're not likely to see them. And if you do, you slam the brakes on and hope all is okay. Is this a pre-map scenario since it's a pattern, or is this a real-time scenario?
So you can do both with the kind of the concept. So we don't stop any kind of idea thinking here in what you can and can't do with such a scenario. We've just tested and being proved theory that this could work in real life. So, you can, for example, if you have a high definition map, every major point that you would need to know that's on that route, and they get more and more, they get improved every generation, and you can start to do things like crowdsourced maps as well, where you can start to use the data from the camera to populate, for example, what's going on in the maps and so on as well. But then the infrastructure camera is there, so if you have something that can be seen, you could in theory see either the predefined, this is where someone might jump out in front of you, and you can also do the actual, this is where someone is right now standing behind a tree ready to jump in front of you. There's no stopping that. It's about availability and connectivity, and of course the processing power available to you outside of the vehicle itself.
Along those lines, are there any new and emerging ADAS technologies that you see coming to market soon that will enhance the overall safety?
I mean, I think we've come a long way. Even since 10, 15 years ago, you can see the huge steps forward with going from having a luxury function to being mandated functions, to being mandated groups of functions, to being, part of an NCAP score and so on. We've come a long, long way, right? So I think where I start to see the advantages of how we improve safety now is not necessarily in what we know and we can do already today, which is we know we can drive a car pretty well. We know we can do maneuvers like overtaking and lane changing and all kinds of things. We know those things are possible. We can prove it. It's available in cars you can buy today. It's making sure that the availability is higher than it is today. So it's in more vehicles, but also that it works better with the interaction with the driver. So today, drivers, some of them turn these features off because they feel they're annoying. If you get the supporting functions, of course, you can't turn off mandated functions, but you can turn off supporting functions. And they're not really used effectively all the time. So some things I've seen that have been pretty cool is the way you can interact with the driver through, for example, a very graphical heads-up display, or you can inform properly about what's coming up by highlighting certain areas and so on. So you want to be able to make this immersive. And I think that's where we start to see a pretty set of cool technology. And of course, I, like everyone else, loved that LG screen that we saw at CES when you saw the see-through screen. And of course, those things we've also seen potentially on inside of windscreens and being able to highlight objects or give you information in a different way than a general heads-up display. There's also other ways to do that. But I think that's, for me, the next logical step is learning the driver's behavior to be able to make sure that they are comfortable with the system so they don't turn it off, and then also being able to show and visualize where there's real threats in a way that helps you in the day-to-day.
The LG screen was the coolest thing I've seen in a long time at CES. Point blank, the absolute coolest thing. And I had this whole vision that perhaps it's a partnership with Corning Glass that's going to get in the vehicle. You're right. There's going to be a lot of interesting breakthroughs around augmented reality in the vehicle with those screens. A startup, I think it was about 2 years ago, Fire, came out of the Harvard Vision Lab. They ended up getting acquired by Google. They were working on augmented technology for cars because this gentleman, he immigrated to America. He didn't know how to drive in Boston, couldn't stare at his phone because of the driving environment. So what does a great engineer do? He built something to solve the problem, and he did really well. Changpeng, well done on the acquisition, sir. Are you seeing any interesting startups trying to tackle the ADAS problem? Obviously, we have the well-known ones that are tackling the level 4 problem, but have you seen any interesting startups looking to tackle the ADAS problem?
I mean, there's new ones popping up all the time, so I'm not sure I can call one out. And of course, this happens when you get into a space where there's a lot of hype and a lot of investment from big players. You get a lot of new ideas coming out and that are helping in some way or another. And it can be everything from, we participate in a number of these startup collaboration kind of growing grounds around the world where we start to see what can come out. It can be something as simple as, or complex, but maybe less attractive for an end customer, like cybersecurity, for example, which is of course huge in real life. And so, or it could be something like a new potential perception partner or a new potential drive policy or a new potential. There's plenty popping up. And of course, the drive with the investments in China and the kind of the number of vehicles that are coming out of China now that are starting to encroach on the global markets, and they're very good, a lot of them as well. So, it's not a difficult to see that. I've really made a lot of these small companies pop up with ideas. So I think we'll see more of them, and I think they'll come in faster. But I would say the interesting ones for me at the moment are maybe not around what you would expect. It's, as I said, it's cybersecurity, it's how you train the neural network itself, how you can, the difference between unsupervised and supervised learning, how you use the kind of AI to be able to interact with the driver and do planning and scenarios and make it comfortable and make sure the driving experience is good and so on. Those are the ones I'm looking out for quite a lot. We do generally, of course, always monitor sensors as well. And you've got things like gated imaging and other types of sensors that are coming out. LiDAR was a big hype some years ago, and we did an investigation with 90 plus LiDAR hardware providers or concept providers at some point in time when the hype was as large as it was. So you get those all the time. But for me, it's kind of these niche things that are a bit more interesting right now.
You kick the tires. There's no doubt that you really kick the tires. So you mentioned 90 plus companies for LiDAR. Is that across other technologies where you'll sit there and look at everything to understand what's out there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the computing power available to you and also the way things have moved in the last 5 to 7 years have allowed a lot, kind of changed the dynamics a lot. And of course, you have to be respectful of the two different perspectives. You have a large company like Magna who's excellent at building a lot of things and really, really powerful in form of that. I feel great as part of Magna to be able to say, I have access to all this people, all this energy, all this technology, everything as well. And you have to make sure you're not getting too comfortable, though, that, sometimes a startup can help you because they don't have anything to rely on. They have to make it work, and they don't have anything to start with. They have nothing, and they can think about a problem in a different way. So, you have those two dynamics there, but it's very difficult to do one without the other. At a certain point in time, if you want to get access to everyone in the market, you need to have someone who's big enough to be able to take that into itself and do it. So for sure, with the amount of investment in vehicles at all and the amount of investment in software and technology in vehicles, you can see a lot of players coming in and a lot of small companies starting up.
From a strategy perspective, how do you ensure that Magna is always on the cutting edge, but nimble enough to move when the market moves? A clear example is we had the giant shift to EVs, and now we're back to hybrids, and it's going to shift probably back to EVs at some point.
Yeah, I mean, for us, EV or not doesn't make as much of a difference. Of course, we have products in the Magna portfolio that guard both directions. We have experience with both directions. It's more about, and you're right, we have to make sure that we're nimble enough to be able to make it happen either way. And I think we are helped by the fact we are kind of a very experienced organization with a lot of very, I can say, heavyweight hitters in the corporation as well that know, okay, these things take time. We heard, as you mentioned in the beginning of the call, we heard some years ago that level 4 autonomy would be here in 2021 by some players, and we're in 2024 and it's still nowhere close, I would say, in mass market to everybody. And the same thing with EVs. EVs, they're not just a battery and a motor, they're actually also infrastructure and cabling and chargers, and the amount of rare earth metals you need to be able to produce if you would do it to every vehicle of the 100+ million that's produced every year is quite large. So, it takes time and it has to mature, and we're very well along the development of ICEs and gearboxes. And so it will take some time before it really, really can play out. So we've always guarded against that. I would say we've had a number of different options available to us. We've made sure a lot of our systems aren't reliant on it being one or the other as well, which helps us, of course, in a scenario where a customer decides to change path or to slow it down or to speed it up and so on. We can be there and be ready for it.
That's the key. That's why you've been around for as long as you are, and that's why you'll be around for another 100 years. In your opinion, what does the future mobility look like?
Future mobility, that's a big question. I mean, I think, of course, it's different than it is today. It's hard to know if you can get to the full dream of flying cars and, other kinds of setups as you do. But I think that at least in the foreseeable future, I definitely see much higher level of autonomy, a much higher level of being able to have a freedom in your choice to buy or rent or use a service to be able to do what you need to do. Of course, mobility is a wider thing than just automotive. It's or passenger cars. You also have trucks as well, which I think there's a huge amount of development going on in, which is really interesting. You also have delivery, last mile deliveries and drones and all kinds of things, which also has been a ton of development on. So I think the way we think about mobility will be different, and it's going to be really interesting to see. But from my perspective, of course, there will be less driving around looking at stores and more getting things delivered at home, which I think is what's already happening. And you see stores starting to have issues with that. And I think it's more about using having a much more comfortable experience in using vehicles as well. So the masses will be much more into having a pleasurable experience of taking a trip somewhere rather than having to sit there and feel like they're on edge driving on a highway for many hours.
Well said. It's going to come down to experiences. I call it the Amazon effect. You order a book for a child, they expect the book there in a couple hours. They'll be here tomorrow. What? Why not today? And when we were kids, they'll be here in a week, 2 weeks. Oh, okay. Now that book has to be here the same day. Everything's changing. Mobility will be about experiences. You mentioned trucking. I believe trucking is going to be one of the greatest use cases for autonomy. It'll probably scale more meaningful from a revenue perspective than robo-taxis initially and passenger-owned vehicles initially. It's an emerging market, and we're going to see perhaps driver out this year with Kodiak and Aurora in Texas. We'll see how that goes, but there's a clear business case there. Stephen, this has been a really insightful conversation today. Look forward to having you back again. For today, as we look to wrap up, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them today?
I think for me, again, as a personal perspective, which I think I share a lot with the people I work with in Magna, is I really want them to think about how we make this work as a group. Like whoever you are and wherever you're contributing, if you're a driver and you turn the system off, try using it, right? Try giving feedback. If you're an OEM, try giving some more thought about what you're good at and what we're good at and the other way around so we can make that happen. Because I want to make sure that this is accessible to people. That's my main driver to do this, is to make everyone's life a little bit better every day and to make it accessible to as many people as possible, because doing that will allow us to develop it faster. And it also will allow us to save lives and provide improved safety. So a lot of things we do are to improve safety and to make people's lives better. And that's what I want to leave with.
Try new technology. Embrace partnerships. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is Magna. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices LLC to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.